Alrighty, today we are going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons, who finally made the playoffs this year. That ended the fairly lengthy drought, and were able to have a really competitive series with New York before losing in the first round. But it was a great stepping stone for this team in the first season with JB Bickerstaff as head coach, considering how the last few years have gone for them. It was impressive for them to make it back to the postseason. So, bright future in Detroit, a few pieces to build around, and then a few pieces that are good for, I guess, their team specifically, and trying to build what they think Detroit basketball is, fairly reminiscent of what Detroit basketball has always been. So, that's pretty cool. And then I think that there's also some players that have a lot of talent that may be best utilized as trade pieces for Detroit. And we'll talk about all that and where this team needs to go from here. Um, but seriously, shout out to the Pistons for making it back to the playoffs. It was a lot of fun to see playoff basketball in Detroit. Before we get into all the specifics, I just want to remind you guys that Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Got baseball season in full swing, and of course, the NHL and NBA playoffs are both going on. We just had game one of the Thunder Timberwolves series last night, with the Thunder taking control in the second half. The series line now is if you want to bet on the Thunder winning that series, it is minus 675 odds. So not really getting a lot of bang for your buck. And then Minnesota's at plus 491 to win the rest of the series, down 0-1. And then, of course, we'll have game one of the Pacers Knicks tonight. The Knicks are favored to win the series at minus 160 odds, and they're favored to win game one, minus 180, favored by 4.5 points. These are the live odds as of the time of me recording this on Bet Online. So if you want to get in on the action, Bet Online's a great place to do that. They have the largest selection of odds on everything from the MLB to the NHL to UFC, and they remain the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. Bet Online, the game starts here. Okay, so as I said, Detroit made it back to the playoffs this year. If you're watching, you're seeing me in my Detroit 2025 playoffs hat, which I got when I was up in Detroit this past weekend, only a few days ago. So shout out to the Menace Podman for showing me around Detroit, because I hadn't really been there since I was younger, to be around the area. But I had a great time. So shout out to the Menace Podman. Give them a follow. Check out their podcasts. They also have their WNBA show, Will Slambier. So Steve and Scott do great work. Make sure to check them out for their content and just because they're cool guys. So, but we'll talk about the other parts of Detroit, such as their basketball team, with that being the Detroit Pistons, who went 44-38 this year, were the sixth seed in the East. A couple different calls go their way, and maybe it's not just a first round appearance for them. Obviously, we can all look back to Tim Hardaway Jr.'s shot from the corner where they could have called a foul but didn't. Um, so it's like things like that just happen in basketball, but it is what it is. They'll have the 37th pick in the draft this year. They are sending their first round pick out to Minnesota, and then they're also sending out their second round pick. Between a million different trade stipulations, it's going to end up with the Bucks. So they'll have Toronto's second round pick this year. But moving forward, they have all their firsts. They have a ton of extra second round picks. So Detroit has the pieces to make a swing for a star if they so choose. As far as who they'll have for next season, Cade Cunningham, his contract extension will go into effect starting next year, which will raise the cost in the, I guess, cost in taking into they're cutting into their cap space. I'm drawing a blank on like the best term for that, but anyways, um, they'll still have Tobias Harris, Isaiah Stewart, etc. The free agents will be Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters III, Paul Reed, and then Dennis Jenkins will be a restricted free agent. Um, I think, and we can go back to even before this past season to kind of look at what this means, but they were able to bring Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. in, and they fit really well with what Detroit wanted to do. And they were kind of underrated pickups. Like, you're not expecting like Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley as the players that are going to come turn you from the worst record in the league to being a playoff team. And obviously there was a number of other factors that came into play there, but they didn't swing for the fences with their moves to do it, but it fit really well. Then obviously the Dennis Schroeder acquisition at the trade deadline was also helpful, but they provided spacing that they just didn't have before. Cade Cunningham was working in lineups that just didn't really open up the floor for him. I think Jaden Ivey's improved as a shooter, but he's not a knockdown shooter. Sar Thompson is a non-shooter. Jalen Duren is a non-shooter. They've tried the whole floor spacing thing with Isaiah Stewart as like a stretch, even like a stretch four, but in reality, they figured out this year that, and new coaching staff figured it out, that Isaiah Stewart as a backup center that can also space the floor is good. But bringing in Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley to space the floor just opened up so much for this team. And then the natural progression from some of their younger guys kind of all works together to take this team to the postseason. But now Beasley and Tim Hardaway are both free agents, and I would be shocked if they didn't at least try and bring those guys back. Specifically Malik Beasley, because he was second in the league in 3-pointers made this season. So I think they're both guys that really fit with what Detroit wants to do, in the fact that having a floor spacer helps, because they don't have another true one on their team like the way that those two guys can. So we'll see. Maybe they'll explore other options to fill that role. I know Malik Beasley's already expressed interest in returning, so it would be a bit surprising if they didn't at least look at bringing both of them back. But the rest of this young core, it's still there. Like, they have, as I mentioned, Cade Cunningham, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, all under contract, and then a couple of the other young guys that still hold value, such as like a Marcus Sasser who's under contract, Bobby Klintman, um, some other two-way guys that aren't like the main pieces, but that's their young core. But they've mixed it well with accomplished veterans to make this whole thing work. Now it's good because now you got all these young guys playoff experience. We saw Asar Thompson defend at a high level on Jalen Brunson. Now you have to be impressed with that. Like, when you walk away encouraged from how well Asar Thompson played defense. That's a piece for the future for sure. Cade Cunningham is the franchise player, no doubt. But they have other very exciting pieces there as well. But we'll talk about the fantasy side of things, and potentially how this impacts the team moving forward. I guess we can talk about the general team direction before we get into the specific players, because what do you do this offseason if you're Detroit? And how do we react in fantasy, I guess, is what we can talk about before the specific guys. In my mind, it may even be better for their long-term, or kind of the long game for them, that they didn't win the first round, because sometimes we see these teams, they have a lot of playoff success very quickly for one reason or another, and then they don't make the necessary moves to continue the growth of the team. The 2021 Hawks are the best example of that, in the sense that they had a team with some homegrown players on it, led by Trae Young, and then having like John Collins. I mean, if you look at the lineup that the Hawks had to make that conference finals run, a starting lineup of Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, Bogdan Bogdanovic, John Collins, and Clint Capella. It's actually kind of wild to think about it. That was an Eastern Conference Finals team, but they also had some veterans playing at a high level, such as like Lou Williams, Danilo Gallinari, off the bench. Helped a lot. But I don't think Detroit should opt to do what Atlanta did, and that's say, "Oh, we have these homegrown players that are still fairly young. Let's just run it back." Well, things didn't go as well. I think looking back, it's easy to at the time, I'm not even saying I knew at the time, like, the Hawks should have done that differently. They should have upgraded their team. Like, I was fine with running it back, but I think it's kind of a lesson to be learned, to say, okay, like, from an outside perspective, I don't think that just running it back makes sense, especially now with Jason Tatum having suffered a torn Achilles and Giannis Antetokounmpo potentially available for trade. If he goes out west, East opens up a lot. I mean, you'll have Indiana and New York competing again. You'll have Cleveland competing again, but then everything else is very, very wide open. And if you make the right moves, some of these fringe play-in teams, even such as Detroit, such as Atlanta, such as Orlando, um, Orlando, its health is a big thing for them as well. They just need to be healthier next year. But all these teams, it's a great year to be aggressive, and trying to get better because everything is out west, all the talent. So if you get hot in the playoffs, you can make a run. I mean, we'll see how this New York Indiana series goes, but Detroit looked really good against New York and really competed. And now that's a team that could be making the NBA finals, but at least made the conference finals. So how do they upgrade their team? Well, I mean, is the Giannis swing. Should they be in that conversation? Potentially. Should they be in conversations for Kevin Durant? Potentially. And this is just me speculating and saying, heck, if those guys are available, I think you need to have conversations about how to make this team better. And then there's going to be other guys. I mean, I think we're looking at Boston, and if they're going to potentially make some guys available because Tatum's not going to be healthy next year. The same thing with Milwaukee. If they trade Giannis, are they going to be looking to move some other guys? You can add smaller pieces that aren't necessarily superstars to continue to improve this team. And I think that there are two players on this team that I would pretty much hang up the phone immediately if somebody asks for them, and that's Cade Cunningham and Asar Thompson. And then I think that there's other players that still hold a ton of value that I wouldn't be actively looking to move, but I think you have to part with to bring in the right player. And such like the other young guys I mentioned, such as like a Ron Holland, a Jalen Duren, a Jaden Ivey. Like you're not actively looking to move off of Ron Holland after his rookie year, but if the right player is available, I don't think that you say, no, sorry, we're holding on to Ron Holland. Just depends on the player. Um, we'll see if Detroit's even active in the trade market. I think improving this team is what makes sense, um, through trades, because they still have some fun young pieces. But is this enough to have this team compete and to win a championship next season? Because Cade showed that he's ready to be the superstar. Star Thompson is the lockdown defender. The other guys played well, obviously, to have this team get there. But are they championship level players at this moment? We'll see. We'll see how Detroit feels about it. We'll see how other teams feel about it. But we could see Detroit being active in the trade market, just because it makes sense for them to continue to progress this team. All right. So we've got a guy like Cade Cunningham, as I said, is the franchise player. 26.1 points per game, 6.1 rebounds, 9.1 assists. Really took the leap in fantasy that we've been waiting for him to take. Basically improved his numbers across the board. Almost all career highs, I think. Yeah, even the turnovers were a career worst, but it's still career high, so I guess that counts. Um, the field goal percentage was a career high, and I think that was something that was almost like a surprise how iffy it was early on in his career, because he is a very like a bigger guard, a strong guard, but he is that like clear franchise player. I think that I felt like that since before he got drafted. I remember texting my friend who's a Pistons fan as soon as they won the lottery and said, like, congrats, like you have a franchise player. I don't think that was like an uncommon opinion at the time, or is especially isn't now with how well he played this year. But he finally took that leap that we were expecting, and he was in the conversation for most improved player. Had he not been a former number one overall pick, he would have had a very strong case for it because he really did. He was one of the most improved players in the league this year, but it's the natural progression that you expect from a player who was drafted number one overall. But it resulted in more wins too, which was great. When we did, Matt Lawson and I did our top 24 mock. Let me pull up the results because I believe Matt took him sixth. Just going to double check that. Yep, Matt took him sixth. So sixth overall in a dynasty startup. I think there's an argument for him to be fifth, anywhere between like 5 and 8, maybe even a tad lower. For him to be kind of in that range, I think that makes sense. And he's going to be very, very good for a very long time, among the best players in fantasy basketball. I think you're going to have to continue to deal with the turnovers. Those aren't probably going to go anywhere, maybe go down a little bit. But the amount of other things that he does at a high level makes up for that because he was at a steal per game this year, just under a block per game, 2 threes, good free throw percentage. I think the continued just progression as a player will hopefully help the field goal percentage get a little better because 46.9% still isn't ideal. But yeah, we're talking about a fantasy superstar for a decade. Definitely worth one of the top few picks in a dynasty league. And if you have him, don't trade him in your current league. That's the way I look at Cade Cunningham. How good can he be in real life? I think he has the talent to be an MVP candidate. I don't know if he'll be dominant enough to actually win an award, but I think he's a guy where he'll be good enough to say he's in the conversation fairly often, especially if Detroit continues to improve as a team, because I think that matters. As we've seen in recent voting, like it takes a generational season to win MVP without being one of the top few teams in the league. The second leading scorer on Detroit only played 30 games this year, and they went 14 and 16 when he was playing, and 30 and 22 when he wasn't playing. Don't think that's enough of a, I guess, huge difference for us to say, yeah, like I don't know how he fits long term, but Jaden Ivey was good this year. He really did improve as a shooter. He's up to 40.9% on 5.1 attempts per game. So hitting 2.1 per game, that's much improved. Consider he shot 34.3 and 33.6% from deep the previous 2 seasons. Career high 17.6 points, 4.1 rebounds, 4 assists, which wasn't a career high, but it's because when he was a rookie, Cade Cunningham was out the whole year or most of the year. So he played a lot more point guard minutes. So we know what Jaden Ivey can do. He's definitely a super talented player. I question how well he fits on this team. He was improved on defense this year, and that's huge. I think the whole team improving on defense helped with that. His defensive box plus minus was the best of his career. His defensive win shares were actually slightly down. Steal rate was slightly up. I think when you look at this team and say, okay, you have Cade Cunningham, a shooter, Asar Thompson, and then it was like Tobias Harris, Jalen Duren. Like, I would assume Jaden Ivey is a starting player no matter where he is, whether that's in Detroit or if he has moved. So is he a good enough volume shooter to really space the floor for Cade Cunningham to operate, for Asar Thompson to drive? Because like you already have, again, 2 non-shooters. Like Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren are non-shooters. Asar will shoot it as opposed to Jalen Duren, who just won't. but that's not a high percentage shot. Jaden Ivey, I think, was improved as a shooter this year. Hopefully, this is something that can stick. Like if he can continue to shoot, I don't even want to say 40% from three, because I think that's almost unrealistic to ask, but like close to 40%, like 37, 38%, and like make the defense have to respect the shot enough where they're out there defending to open up the driving lanes. Then that works. Um, Other than that, it's you look at it, is he more valuable as a trade piece? Because we saw the assists were solid during his rookie season with no Cade. We saw the shooting improve this year. Is a trade package with Jaden Ivey, draft picks, and like salary filler that could, depending on the player, that could be anywhere from like Tobias Harris to actually, that might be the only player that's worthy of being called contract filler that's under contract next year. Because Tim Hardaway is a free agent. Isaiah Stewart, you could say that, but I think Isaiah Stewart just fits Detroit basketball so well. So I don't think he's more valuable just kind of where he is as opposed to being used as salary filler in a trade. But is Jaden Ivey and picks to bring in like a star, is that worth it? Is that something that makes more sense for this team than to just see if it works still, even with because they played really well in the playoffs without Jaden Ivey? I think that makes him more expendable to them. Not saying he has no value or that, like, if he returns it, like, why are they doing that? It's a stupid decision because he's a very talented player. But do they like does he mean more to another team that could be willing to part with a star? And I think that it's hard to speculate exactly who that could be just for no reason. But there are going to be very talented players available for trade that I think we haven't even heard about being available yet. So it's interesting. We'll see what he does. I think if he is in a scenario where Jaden Ivey is playing point guard, we could see him be more valuable in fantasy basketball and category leagues because we'll see the boost in assists, see the boost in usage. And now that he's older and a better player than he was as a rookie, well, we should see improvement in efficiency as well. So I think if you have Jaden Ivey in fantasy, the best scenario or best path for him is to be traded elsewhere to where he can have the ball in his hands more. Where that scenario is, I don't know. Could you, and this isn't, again, entirely speculation, so maybe if you don't like that kind of content, then feel free to skip like the next 30 seconds, but like a Jaden Ivey and picks and whatever else it takes to make it work for like a Devin Booker, where Jaden Ivey's now in Phoenix, has the ball in his hands the whole time. And this would be under the assumption that Phoenix is also looking to clean house by like moving Kevin Durant. Then Devin Booker would be home in Michigan. He can space the floor for Cade Cunningham, also be a go-to scorer for this team. Devin Booker in the East, that him and Cade together, like that makes them a very dangerous team. Like a lot of things make sense for Detroit, and that I don't know how much it makes sense for Phoenix, who doesn't have their pick for a while. I think it would require a lot of first-round picks from Detroit to make that happen. No idea if either team would be interested in that, but I think that would make sense for both Detroit in the sense that they're getting a All-NBA player back, giving up Jaden Ivey and a lot of draft picks, and it's a better situation for Jaden Ivey. I don't know. It's a scenario. If Jaden Ivey sticks around, I still think he can be a really strong contributor, but I think it does cap his value. When we see that all the time where players just playing alongside other good players that are slightly better or that just have the ball in their hands more, it limits their value. We just talked about it with Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. Like Franz was at his best when Paolo was out. When Paolo plays, he was still successful and was able to contribute value. But Paolo needing the ball just takes away a little bit. That's fine. It's not terrible, but the next player we got is Jalen Duren, who made improvements this year. I think we had legitimate concerns about how he would fit in on a playoff team. He's so young that it really like it was concerns at the time with the understanding that hey, he can improve. He is young, and that's kind of what happened. He averaged 11.8 points, 10.3 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.1 blocks per game this season. Fouls went up, minutes went down, which I think you can just kind of attribute to he was also more aggressive getting blocked, so he just got into more foul trouble. Um, you can, I guess, you'd like to see him not in foul trouble, but having him be more aggressive, I think, is great. Um, Dominates the glass whenever he's on the floor. He's a good passer for a big. So, like, I'm not too concerned about the rebounds and points going down slightly when he played 3 minutes fewer per game. That's enough time for him to get a rebound and a bucket. But he also averaged a career high in blocks per game. And this is another one we saw the defensive numbers improve, and it was pretty drastic. He had a negative defensive box plus minus as a rookie, just right 0.1 year two, and then 1.5 this past season. Also had the best offensive box plus minus of his career. And then for defensive win shares, he had 1.6 and 1.8 in the first 2 years. He had 3.4 this past season. So combined his first two seasons was what he did this year. Also saw his offensive win shares improve as well. Block rate went up. Really made improvements on the defensive end, I guess, is kind of my overall point, which first year with JD Bickerstaff as the head coach, he's able to come in and just help his team figure things out on defense. They were improved defensively as a team. So that makes me, I guess, a bit more optimistic about Duren because last year when we talked about it, I don't remember if it was podcast, it was on Twitter, it was everywhere. It was like, hey, this guy's a dominant player for fantasy basketball when he gets the minutes. And he's going to dominate the glass. He's a good passer for a big. He's going to shoot a high field goal percentage because he's dunking the ball. But is he good enough defensively for a team to say, hey, we think we can win while you're playing 34 minutes per game? And I think what he did this year showed that that's possible. He didn't play 34 minutes per game because he was in foul trouble sometimes and because Isaiah Stewart was also there as well. I don't know if JB Bickerstaff has the intention to play him 32 to 34 minutes per game, even if he isn't in foul trouble, but I have to assume it'd be closer to he played 29 minutes per game the year before, something closer to that. So when he's on the floor, very, very good. He's not a bad free throw shooter for a center. It regressed this season. It was 79% from the free throw line in year two, 66.9 this past season. Hopefully it can land somewhere around the middle because that would also just be average for a center, which is something that hopefully he's able to get to consistently. But again, he's going to be among the league leaders in rebounds, especially like per possession rebounds, just because he may not play enough minutes to truly lead the league in that stat. Let's see. We have Asar Thompson, who had a super fun year. Again, just not the best shooter, but we've seen his brother have a lot of success. And we've all seen Asar Thompson has success, but I think Amen Thompson had a better year this year, but neither of them is hitting shots, hitting jumpers. 10.1 points, 5.1 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 1.7 steals per game, in 22 and a half minutes. 22 and a half minutes, 1.7 steals per game that's high level stuff right there. Because that's about where I believe last season, or I guess not this past season, the year before, Dyson Daniels was at about 22 minutes per game and averaged 1.4 steals, got up to 34 minutes per game this year and averaged 3 steals. Could we see Asar Thompson if he were to get to 28, 30 minutes per game? Because he started 48 of his 59 appearances this year. But again, 22 and a half minutes per game. I think if we can see him get up to 30 to 32 minutes per game, we could see him be among the league leaders in steals. I think he will be anyway, because I don't think he'll play 22 and a half minutes per game next year. I think that'll go up at least a little bit. And that's kind of where he's going to make his money in fantasy. Good rebounder, fine passer, not really going to do a whole lot there. The scoring, it's like he's able to score, but non-shooter. His percentages this year, 22.4% from deep, which was an improvement over his rookie year where he shot 18.6% on threes. But he only shot 0.8 threes per game this year after shooting 1.8 as a rookie. So, like, let's just figure out other ways to help this guy score as opposed to hoping he just improves as a 3-point shooter. And I do think that number will eventually improve. I don't think he'll consistently be like a 33% 3-point shooter, but I don't think that 22.4% is where he'll hover. Hopefully he can continue to improve. 64.1% from the free throw line this year, 2.4 attempts, so not doing a whole lot of damage there. But yeah, unreal defensive ability here. Jalen Brunson talked about how difficult it was having Asar Thompson guard him in the playoffs, and this guy's 22. So yeah, he's going to be giving a lot of teams a lot of trouble for a lot of years, and it's good for Detroit to have him in this lineup. Fits the Detroit mentality well, I think, and what they're trying to build their team as. Same thing as a guy like Isaiah Stewart. But Asar Thompson's also one of the best defenders in the league. Hopefully, we'll see more minutes from him next season. This is my message to JB Bickerstaff, just begging and pleading him. More Asar Thompson minutes, please. Let's see. There's a couple other the young guys that we briefly mentioned at the beginning, and the next one to talk about is Ron Holland. In his rookie year, numbers didn't really impress. 6.4 points, 2.7 rebounds, 1 assist. Also a little over half a steal. Only played 15.6 minutes per game. Only started twice. Had some really fun stretches, fun flashes. Positive defensive box plus minus, 1.5 win shares as a rookie. Those are good, encouraging things. And I think that was one of the strong points for him when he was drafted is elite defender, elite athlete. Can he figure out the jump shot? Similar archetype, not like saying they're the exact same player, but similar style in terms of what his strengths and weaknesses are to Asar Thompson. But you could have two elite defenders that are also freak athletes. That if you either of them figure out the jumper or somewhat figure out a jumper, because Ron Holland was at 23.8% this year, which I guess that's a better mark than Asar Thompson. So who's a better shooter? Doesn't really matter at this point because neither is great, but they both have the tools to be elite in the NBA. I think he is a player that if they don't trade him, it'll be like he'll just continue to grow. I think he'll be he has the upside to be a phenomenal player in the NBA. So again, like I'm not saying they need to get rid of Jaden Ivey. They need to get rid of Ron Holland. I'm saying I think you can explore trades to potentially get someone that was more ready to help right now because Ron Holland will turn 20 in June. Like he's still 19. And that could be very, very attractive to a different team that might be more open to parting with a star to get back a young player of his caliber that's also as young as he is, that showed the flashes that he showed. But I think if he sticks around, Detroit has the potential to put together some incredible defensive lineups. Having both Ron Holland and Asar Thompson out there, that'll be pretty difficult for teams to score on the perimeter. The fact that neither is a great shooter limits how much you'd be able to use a lineup like that unless one of them, or both of them ideally, are able to get to at least like a league average 3-point percentage. Because it just makes it difficult if like sure, like yeah, they're not scoring, but also if you're not scoring because you have both Ron Holland and Asar Thompson out there and there's just no room to operate. low scoring basketball. Maybe that's what Detroit's trying to bring back. 90s basketball. Let's just play elite defense um, and not score. Let's do it. The difference is the fouling aspect of it will be different, but we don't need to get into a eras debate. Not what I was trying to bring up. That's what happens when I ramble. Some of the other, I mentioned Marcus Sasser. I think he had some fun flashes over the past 2 years, which could give him some trade value, but not sure how much. But I think he's a nice piece to keep around. Maybe if he continues to grow, can be like a nice sixth man. Um, I think Dennis Schroeder as like a backup point guard, just having like a really strong backup point guard makes sense. If it's not Sasser, and I mean Jaden Ivey will be there. If Jaden Ivey's there, then he can potentially fill that role. But having Schroeder as like a veteran option, if they're able to bring him back, I think that makes sense. Tobias Harris will continue to be a solid fantasy player, but we know who Tobias Harris is. It's not changing. Isaiah Stewart, solid streamer when Jalen Duren's out or in foul trouble. Not a phenomenal fantasy option. But that's kind of it for Detroit. I think they have, again, multiple players that have a lot of upside. Some of them that are already having success, such as Cade Cunningham. And there are pieces for this team to become very good for a very long time. And I think that sometimes there is that fear of, well, shoot, I don't know if I want to trade away my young piece because what if they become the superstar? And we do the same thing in dynasty leagues. When someone's on our team, we hold them or find them more valuable than if they're on someone else's team. We're afraid of trading players away out of fear that they're going to become superstars in the next team. And shoot, have we just given them one more year? And I think that's how you end up wasting primes. Now, this team is like the players there are young enough that I think Detroit has time to make these decisions. It's not going to be the end of the franchise, and you're ruining Cade Cunningham's career if they don't improve this offseason to give them a chance next year. But I think the opportunity to make a run next year that it looks like we'll have, or a number of teams will have in the East, combined with how good Cade Cunningham was this year and some of these other guys that took leaps this year, this team will be ready to compete. And I think it would be a disservice to what they have to not try and improve this roster. And depending on those moves, we could see players lose out on minutes, but I'm not super concerned about them making a trade that takes away minutes or shots from Cade Cunningham. I'm not too concerned about Sarah Thompson and Jalen Duren. I think that moves could potentially impact a player like Jaden Ivey or a player like Ron Holland. But we'll see. We'll see what Detroit ends up doing. Maybe they won't listen to my advice and things will actually work out better. And we'll see. That happens. It's not a perfect science to say that don't be patient. It's not a perfect science. So we'll see what ends up happening. And as it's happening, I'm sure we will continue to discuss it, both as a team and how it impacts Dynasty Fantasy Basketball. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Show. I mentioned me and Matt doing the top 24 Dynasty mock. If you missed that yesterday, be sure to go check that out. Of course, Matt knows what he's talking about more than anyone else. So make sure to check that episode out. A lot of great info in there. Then you can like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff to this episode. Follow me on Twitter at NoRuben22. But that's going to do it for this one, and I will see you guys tomorrow.